A sunny day at the park turns into an unexpected confrontation when a mother's love is questioned. What unfolds will challenge everything you thought you knew about family and prejudice. It was the kind of Saturday where families gathered to shake off the week's exhaustion. The sun hung lazily in the sky over Shady Oak Park, a suburban haven in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where towering trees framed neatly manicured lawns. The playground buzzed with life, children laughing, the squeak of swings, and parents chatting on benches nearby. Among the joyful chaos, a young girl with strawberry blonde hair chased her kite, her laughter echoing as it dipped and soared above the grass. Her mother, a poised black woman in her late 30s, stood at the edge of the playground, her face lit up with a smile. She adjusted her daughter's ponytail, her hands gentle but practiced, the way only a mother's hands could be. They shared a moment, a burst of giggles over a tangled kite string, and it was clear to anyone paying attention that they were deeply connected, a team of two navigating the world together. But not everyone saw it that way. A woman seated on a bench nearby, let's call her Brenda, watched intently. Her sunglasses perched high on her nose, her lips pressed into a thin line. Brenda noticed the mismatched appearances of the pair, the little girl's pale complexion and the woman's deep brown skin. Something about it didn't sit well with her. She told herself it wasn't about race, though the thought whispered in the back of her mind. She tilted her head, trying to decipher what she thought was an unusual situation. Could it be a babysitter? No, she seems too maternal for that. Maybe a friend's child? Brenda couldn't quite place it, but something about the scene struck her as off. Meanwhile, the girl's laughter continued to spill into the air, unbothered by the woman's scrutiny. Her mother crouched down to fix the kite's tail, her braided hair catching the sunlight. It was a small, tender moment that spoke volumes about their relationship. But Brenda's thoughts spiraled into assumptions, drawing conclusions from a place of deep-seated biases she wouldn't have admitted out loud. She pulled out her phone and scrolled mindlessly, but her attention kept snapping back to the pair. Something about it felt unresolved to her, as if she were watching a mystery unfold right in front of her. But that's when she decided she couldn't ignore it any longer, her thoughts racing toward action. Brenda couldn't shake the uneasiness that had taken root. As much as she tried to convince herself she was acting out of concern, the thoughts swirling in her head carried undertones she wasn't ready to confront. What if the child is in danger? What if this woman isn't who she seems to be? She rationalized, as if her instincts were all the proof she needed. From her bench, she watched closely. The mother and daughter were now sitting together on the grass, the kite forgotten in favor of a shared snack. The mother opened a small lunchbox and handed the girl a sandwich, her expression soft and protective. The girl leaned in, resting her head on her mother's shoulder, crumbs dotting her shirt. Brenda told herself she was being observant, not judgmental, though her gaze lingered longer than it should have. She thought about stories she'd seen in the news, stories that rarely had happy endings, and convinced herself she was doing her civic duty. Her thumb hovered over her phone for a moment before dialing. "Better safe than sorry," she whispered under her breath. The line connected, and the operator's voice was brisk but polite. "Tulsa Police Department, what's your emergency?" Brenda hesitated, suddenly aware of how this might sound. "Hi, I'm at Shady Oak Park, and there's a woman here with a little girl. They don't look like they're related, and it seems suspicious," she said, her voice lowering on the last word as if she were unsure. The operator's tone shifted slightly. "Can you describe what you mean by suspicious?" Brenda stumbled. The child is white, and the woman is black. They're acting close, but I don't think they're family. I mean, maybe it's nothing, but..." Her words trailed off, leaving a weighty silence on the line. "Officers will be dispatched to check it out," the operator said. As she hung up, Brenda glanced back at the pair. The mother was helping the girl wipe her hands with a napkin, her movements tender and precise. For a brief moment, Brenda wondered if she had overstepped, if maybe this was none of her business. But then she convinced herself she had done the right thing. What harm could it do to make sure? The park's easygoing atmosphere shifted as two police cruisers pulled into the nearby lot, their flashing lights drawing attention. Parents stopped mid-conversation, kids paused on the jungle gym, and heads turned toward the scene unfolding near the playground. Brenda adjusted her sunglasses, her heart racing as she watched the officers step out of their vehicles. She felt a strange mix of validation and apprehension. They'll sort it out, she thought, though the unease wouldn't quite leave her. The mother, still seated on the grass with her daughter, didn't notice the commotion at first. Her back was to the lot, her focus entirely on the little girl who was now showing her a flower she had plucked from the grass. It wasn't until the officers approached that the woman's smile faded. "Ma'am," one of the officers called out, his tone firm but not yet aggressive. The mother looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Yes?" she replied, standing up slowly and positioning herself slightly in front of the child. Her voice was calm, but her eyes darted to the officers' hands resting on their belts. "We received a call about a potential situation involving you and the child," the officer continued, his gaze shifting briefly to the little girl who was now clutching her mother's hand. "Can you tell us what's going on here?" The mother glanced around, noticing the small crowd that had begun to form at a cautious distance. Brenda stayed seated on her bench, trying to appear indifferent, though her eyes never left the scene. "What exactly is the issue?" the mother asked, her voice measured. The second officer spoke up. "The report suggested that this child might not be with her rightful guardian. Can you provide some identification or explain your relationship with her?" The mother's lips parted slightly, as if the words she wanted to say had been caught in her throat. She crouched down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Honey, can you stay right here for a moment?" she said softly. The girl nodded, her expression confused but trusting. As the mother stood, she reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet. Her movements were deliberate, her body language signaling compliance. "This is my daughter," she said firmly. "Her name is Ellie, and I adopted her 3 years ago." The first officer glanced at his partner, then back at the mother. "Do you have any paperwork or documentation to support that?" "Yes," the mother replied, her voice still steady but laced with frustration. "I have copies of the adoption papers in my bag. May I retrieve them?" The officers nodded, but the tension in the air was palpable. The crowd whispered among themselves, and Brenda could feel her stomach tightening. The mother pulled out a neatly folded document and handed it to the officer, her hand trembling slightly. "This will explain everything," she said. The officer unfolded the papers, scanning them carefully. His face remained neutral, but his silence seemed to stretch forever. But before he could speak, someone in the crowd muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "This feels wrong." The words hung heavy in the air, adding to the mounting tension. The officer handed the papers to his partner, who examined them just as intently. The crowd edged closer, the whispers growing louder as curiosity fought against propriety. Ellie clung to her mother's leg, her small fingers gripping tightly as she looked up with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The mother took a deep breath, her voice calm but carrying a quiet strength. "Her name is Ellie, and she's my daughter in every way that matters. I adopted her when she was just a baby. Her birth parents—" Her voice caught for a moment, and she pressed her lips together before continuing. "They couldn't care for her, and I knew I could give her the life she deserved." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. "We've been through so much together. Every scraped knee, every first day of school, every bedtime story, those moments are ours, and no one—" Her voice sharpened slightly, her gaze sweeping over the onlookers. "No one gets to question the love I have for my daughter because of how we look." The officer holding the papers looked up, his expression softening. "Everything seems to check out," he said, folding the documents carefully and handing them back. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, ma'am." But the mother wasn't finished. She turned her attention to the crowd, her posture tall and resolute. This right here, is what we face every day. People who think they know better, who can't see past their own assumptions. Families come in all shapes and colors. Love isn't defined by DNA. Ellie tugged on her mother's hand, and she crouched down to meet her daughter's gaze. "You okay, baby?" she asked softly. Ellie nodded, her small face lighting up with a smile that seemed to pierce through the tension. The mother straightened again, looking directly at the officers. "I hope this is a lesson for everyone here. We all need to think twice before we act. Because moments like this, they leave scars." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't flinch, her strength unwavering. The crowd was silent now, the earlier murmurs replaced by a heavy, collective guilt. Brenda sat frozen on the bench, her stomach churning as she realized the weight of her actions. She had intended to help, or so she told herself. But now the truth lay bare. Her assumptions had caused harm. But instead of leaving quietly, the mother's final words rang out, breaking the silence like a hammer striking glass. "Next time, choose kindness." As the officers thanked the mother and walked back to their cars, the tension in the park began to dissipate. The crowd, still lingering, exchanged uneasy glances, many avoiding the mother's sharp, piercing gaze as she stood resolutely by her daughter. Brenda, however, remained rooted to her bench, her heart heavy with regret. She had convinced herself that her intentions were pure, but now she couldn't escape the weight of her assumptions. Watching the mother gather her belongings and comfort Ellie, Brenda's chest tightened. Her thoughts raced. Why did I jump to conclusions? Why didn't I just mind my business? The guilt was unbearable. She wanted to stand, to walk over, to apologize. But what could she possibly say that wouldn't sound hollow or patronizing? Her silence felt safer, though it also felt like a cowardly escape. Nearby, a young father holding his toddler leaned toward another parent and whispered, "This is what's wrong with the world. People judge too quickly." His words stung, not because they were directed at her specifically, but because they were true. Brenda knew it. Others in the crowd were visibly uncomfortable. A woman in yoga gear shook her head and murmured, "She handled that better than I would have." A teenager, recording parts of the scene on their phone, muttered, "This is going viral for sure. People need to see this." The mother, now holding Ellie's hand, glanced toward the gathering of onlookers. She didn't shout, she didn't curse. Her expression alone spoke volumes. There was pain, yes, but also a quiet defiance that refused to be diminished. Brenda lowered her sunglasses, hoping to avoid eye contact, but it was too late. The mother looked directly at her. For a moment, Brenda thought she might approach, but the mother simply held her gaze, then turned and walked away, her daughter skipping beside her as though nothing had happened. The moment lingered. The crowd began to disperse, conversations turning to other things, but Brenda remained seated. Her phone buzzed with a notification, but she couldn't bring herself to look at it. Her mind replayed the mother's words. "Next time, choose kindness." But the echo of those words wasn't just for Brenda. It was for everyone who had watched and done nothing, a reminder that assumptions could cause more harm than silence ever could. The park returned to its usual rhythm. Children on swings, parents chatting, and dogs chasing frisbees. But for Brenda, everything felt different. The scene she had set in motion played over and over in her mind. Each detail, from the officer's questions to the mother's calm yet powerful words, gnawed at her. She finally stood, her legs unsteady, and walked slowly toward the lot. On the way, she passed the bench where the mother and Ellie had been sitting just minutes ago. A crumpled napkin and a forgotten juice box sat there, small remnants of a moment she had disrupted. Brenda stopped, her eyes fixed on the bench. She wanted to do more than apologize. She wanted to change. It wasn't just about saying sorry. It was about recognizing the biases she had carried for so long and the harm they caused. Her actions weren't just a mistake. They were a mirror, forcing her to confront something much deeper. In the following days, Brenda couldn't shake the memory of the mother's words or the look in her eyes. She started reading, learning about adoption, racial biases, and the stories of families like the one she had judged. It wasn't easy to face herself, but she knew it was necessary. For the mother and Ellie, life moved on, as it always did. That day at the park was one of many they'd navigate together, another reminder of the challenges they'd face and the strength they'd need to overcome them. But it was also a victory, a chance to educate, to change minds, and to plant seeds of empathy in a world that desperately needed them. Next time you find yourself making assumptions, stop. Ask yourself, is this about them, or is it about me? And choose kindness. It's a small step that can ripple into something much greater.